Revealed, the incredible transformation that happened when my granddaughter laughed at my fall. Frank had always prided himself on maintaining a calm demeanor, but as he knelt down to tend to the daisies, he found his balance wavering. His hands lost their grip, sending him tumbling backward into the soft earth, a vivid reminder of his 68 years. Laughter erupted from Mia, piercing through the quiet sweetness of the afternoon. Something inside him twisted at the sound. The blend of embarrassment and tenderness took over, a strange concoction of feelings crashing over him like a stormy wave. Mia's giggles melted into the air, but the pressure rising within him pushed against his chest. What did that laughter mean for him? For the man he thought he'd become? Sitting there amid the flower bed, he felt small, exposed. Life had taught him to avoid vulnerability, yet here it was, laughing in his face. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief, yet it felt like a challenge. Did she see him as more than just the retired educator, the wise old man? As Mia's laughter faded, Frank was haunted by every missed opportunity and unfulfilled aspiration. His dream of writing, of sharing stories, laid bare beneath the weight of that single moment. He had dedicated decades to teaching children, crafting lesson plans, shaping young minds, and pouring himself into others, a life of purposeful sacrifice that had left little room for his own dreams. And yet, here was Mia, brilliant and relentless, pulling at the seams of his past. The weight of his hidden aspirations pressed into his thoughts. What if he had pursued writing when he had the chance? Would he still feel this gnawing sense of inadequacy, this urge to reclaim a lost part of himself? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Frank's heart raced as he thought of his old notebooks, gathering dust at the back of the closet. Would he even recognize the man who penned those thoughts years ago? The tenderness in Mia's laughter stirred something deep within, igniting flickers of determination mingled with fear. Would he be able to reclaim this voice that had been swallowed by responsibilities? As days passed, he and Mia began their hunting expedition through libraries and old boxes, brushing aside cobwebs to uncover hidden words. Mia's eyes lit up like lanterns as he recounted family stories and youthful adventures. She saw magic where he saw mundane. Yet with every story retold, shadows of self-doubt crept closer, whispering questions: was he really any good? Could he stand in front of a crowd, open himself up to ridicule again? It was an exhilarating whirl of emotions trapped in the fragile body of a once passionate writer. Despite the joy Mia brought, the fear of failure clutched at him, refusing to let go. Was it too late to chase that dream again? As he thought of standing before fellow townspeople, sharing his stories, the notion filled him with both hope and paralyzing dread. The echoes of laughter still rang in his ears as he pondered what lay ahead: a chance to transcend the shadows, or a swift return to the obscurity he had known for so long. In that moment of mounting tension, he understood. This journey was just beginning, but could he truly believe in his own worth? Frank stood at the threshold of a decision, the sun painting warm patches on his worn face as he stared at the dust-covered notebooks. They beckoned like an old friend with secrets to share, yet fear tightened its grip with every fleeting thought of the past. The laughter that once echoed in his ears transformed into a gentle push, urging him to reclaim the stories waiting within. With Mia by his side, the journey shifted from mere nostalgia to a mission. She became both his muse and mentor, her youthful energy sparking embers of creativity buried deep. They began to meet regularly, each session transforming his trepidation into tangible words. The more he shared, the more he rediscovered the man he had nearly forgotten: a storyteller. Getting his thoughts onto paper felt both exhilarating and confounding, a paradox that left him dizzy with anticipation. Each morning, while Mia thrived in her world of youth, Frank crafted sentences that flowed like a river. occasionally choking on chunks of inadequacy. Writing became a ritual, marked by the smell of coffee and the scratch of pen against paper. He allowed himself to be vulnerable, pouring out fragments of his childhood and the tales that had shaped him, yet conflicting feelings of self-doubt loomed. Was he too rusty? Were his ideas stale? Intrusive thoughts snarled at his convictions, suggesting his words were mere echoes of the past, a relic that belonged to a different time. And yet, as he shared each piece with Mia, her enthusiasm bridged the gap. "Grandpa, this one is my favorite," she exclaimed, eyes reflecting a world of encouragement. Her untainted perception dismantled his hesitation, nudging him closer to confidence. Moreover, that confidence took on a new form when Mia suggested they host a small storytelling night at the local park. The idea struck Frank like a jolt. A public reading? His heart raced, a cocktail of thrill and anxiety swirling within. The acceptance of vulnerability had never been instantaneous, yet Mia's support felt galvanizing. "You can do this, Grandpa," she asserted, a sunny smile illuminating her face. He had dedicated his career to shaping young minds, and here was another chance, perhaps a last one, to inspire even if it was just a handful of onlookers. But who would he be when he stood under the soft glow of the park's lamp, raw and exposed? That image stirred complex emotions within. Frank visualized the skepticism in the crowd, whispering their judgments. Each imagined giggle echoed the laughter of his granddaughter as if mocking his efforts. Why was he allowing that fear to consume him again? Hadn't he spent a lifetime teaching children to embrace their fears and take bold steps? Brooding over these thoughts began to weave a new narrative, one where fear would not dictate his next move. Realization dawned: he was not just a retired educator, he was also a creator, a writer, someone with stories yearning to be told. If he faltered now, wouldn't that be a disservice to Mia and every child he had nurtured? With determination steering his thoughts, he began framing the pieces he would read, stories laced with joy, sorrow, and the laughter of life itself. The gears of ambition clicked into place, and suddenly, the horizon widened. Could this small act of courage become a pivotal moment for both him and Mia? Would it spark something deeper and more significant? As the date crept closer, Frank faced the inevitable war within. The moment to confront his deepest fears had arrived. The stage was set, not just for a performance, but for self-rediscovery. The laughter of past vulnerabilities transformed into a clarion call for this new chapter. Yet, lurking in the back of his mind was the question: could he truly share this part of himself, or would the fear of judgment consume him whole? The night approached, and courage mingled zestfully with trepidation. The time had come to face not just his audience, but the fragments of self he had buried for years. Would he succumb to the shadows or rise to the light? The evening air buzzed with anticipation as Frank approached the park, heart pounding in rhythm with each step. Mia, her finger flicking through the pages of his stories, bounced alongside him, her energy infectious yet starkly contrasting with his rising anxieties. Each path they crossed ignited a mixture of nostalgia and dread. The trees loomed overhead like guardians of his past fears, while the softly glowing lamps seemed to beckon him toward what felt like the precipice of his personal renaissance. He had spent the past week tangled in preparation, rehearsing in the stillness of his living room, only to falter at the sound of imaginary laughter. The voices in his head whispered doubts sharper than any blade. How could his tales resonate in a world so driven by speed and brevity? With every story he had penned, he grappled with the connection he desperately sought. "Grandpa, you'll be amazing," Mia proclaimed, her voice spilling over with vibrant faith. "Do you really think so?" he queried, hoping for validation but knowing she could be blind to the cracks that spanned his confidence. "I know so." "You taught me that stories matter," she retorted, a determined intensity in her eyes that shifted something within him. The weight of her belief washed over him, slowly melting some of his hesitation. But as much as he wanted to believe, Frank felt the persistent pull of self-doubt tugging at him, reminding him that he was just an outdated storyteller in a fast-paced world. As they arrived, the park overflowed with bright lights and chatter. Children played while adults casually immersed themselves in conversations, oblivious to the silent battle raging within him. He felt as though he were caught between two worlds, the familiar warmth of the past and the menacing cold of present-day realities where relevance meant everything. A small stage adorned with fairy lights awaited them, shrouded in the comforting glow that suggested a charm Frank yearned to embrace. Yet, standing behind that microphone, he sensed it was no longer just about words. This would be a manifestation of his vulnerabilities laid bare. The thrill of storytelling now felt like an unrelenting spotlight on all his insecurities. Mia gently squeezed his hand, grounding him. "Remember, it's just you and the stories." Just then, he saw familiar faces from his teaching days. Excitement bubbled within the crowd, and for a moment, he stood petrified, caught between the need to impress and the longing to simply connect. What if they judged him not for his stories, but for the man he had become? The host called for volunteers, and before he could reconsider, Frank stepped forward. Moving to the microphone felt like stepping into a whirlwind. The murmurs of recognition buzzed in the air, and suddenly, he was defining himself again. He inhaled deeply, recalling the hours spent with his granddaughter, pen in hand. What had he learned? It was more than just the crafting of tales. It was about embracing his journey, acknowledging his scars, and finding beauty in his imperfections. "Good evening, everyone," he managed to say, finding solace in the warmth of Mia's encouraging smile. Those eyes sparkled with pride, and for that moment, he was not just a storyteller, but a bridge between generations. As he began reading, words poured from his soul, unearthing fragments of laughter, heartache, and the joys of living. The nervous energy melted, evolving into something exhilarating and yet, alas, not without a hint of vulnerability beleaguering him. He saw faces light up, empathy forming even where judgments may reside. Frank realized this was the true essence of storytelling. It wasn't about perfection but authenticity. Yet, just as he felt himself rising, a thought pierced through him. What if he faltered? What if, in a moment of vulnerability, he stumbled, and the laughter turned against him? The crowd leaned in, excitement crackling in the air, and he steadied himself. Would he embrace the challenge, or would he shy away from the potential ridicule as he dove deeper into his tale, confronting his deepest fears through the pages? A lingering uncertainty remained. What if this moment changed everything or nothing at all? The stage was set, not just for stories, but for a fresh chapter in his life. Would he prove to himself in this space of judgment and acceptance that he was still relevant, that his stories mattered? The audience's attention was a soft murmur around him, beckoning Frank forward. Yet, the critical question echoed, could he truly allow himself to be exposed, raw and real? As Frank delved into his tale, a dynamic shift washed over him. The audience's gaze, filled with curiosity, fueled an unexpected flame within. Each word he uttered seemed to ricochet off the valued memories compressed deep in his heart. It wasn't just a recitation of his past. He was laying bare the fears that had long haunted him, illuminating a pathway to his own truth. Mia's laughter, which cascaded through his recollections, served as the thread binding the moments together. It reminded him of playful afternoons spent spinning unlikely stories under the warm glow of the setting sun. Those moments weren't solely confined to the pages of his manuscripts. They thrummed through his very being, echoing with life. Yet, as the narrative flowed, a familiar surging tide of terror threatened to engulf him. What if he stumbled? What if the laughter turned not with kindness but scorn? The voices from the past whispering insecurities swirled in his mind, clawing desperately for attention. The pressure of those thoughts threatened to congeal, almost paralyzing him mid-sentence. It was a simmering conflict, framed not just by the expectation of his audience, but by his own, internalized struggles for validation. This internal war necessitated a shift in strategy. Rather than attempting to craft a flawless tale, he decided to embrace the imperfections both in his storytelling and in himself. With each vulnerable revelation, he began to see not just the audience, but individuals, each face reflecting his desire for connection. The gentle nods and subtle smiles elongated the moments, urging him to break free from the shackles of fear. Frank honed in on one particularly shaky moment, capturing it with honesty. "You know, I've stumbled 100 times before this," he confessed, his voice gaining strength. "I'll be honest, there were times I wondered if I was too old, too irrelevant." The vulnerability in his tone disarmed the crowd. The atmosphere shifted palpably, blossoming into a space of shared humanity, layered with introspection. As Frank revealed parts of himself that had laid dormant, he found undeniable strength bubbling to the surface. It was liberating and terrifying to acknowledge not just his triumphs, but also his failures. Embracing them invited others into his world. As the final lines of his story resonated, he realized that this wasn't about being universally accepted. This performance was a crucible, transforming him more than any rapturous applause could. For the first time in a long while, the lingering cloud of self-doubt began to thin, dimming as clarity unfurled. He was relevant not because of the stories themselves, but due to the raw authenticity they encapsulated. "Thank you," he said with sincerity, almost in disbelief at how heartfelt the response felt. As applause filled the park, Frank noticed not only the approving looks from familiar faces, but the glimmering eyes of those he had never met. Yet, a titillating tension still remained. Would the connection he had just forged last beyond this moment? Frank felt a tightening in his chest, not from fear, but from the thrill of possibility. The unmistakable surge of determination coursing through him provoked contemplation. He couldn't revert to complacency. The tears that had once obscured his vision now glinted like diamonds, each hinting at potential ventures to explore. What if this encounter was merely the beginning? As he stepped away from the microphone, the chaotic rhythm of the park buzzed around him, but his heart beat in a steady affirmation. The moment had come, the unknown awaited, ready to challenge the narrative of his life. In that ambrosial space of revelation, Frank felt an impending sense of urgency and purpose. A question spun in his mind like a melody: what awaited him on the other side of this epiphany? What stories had yet to emerge from the depths of his experiences, just waiting for the right moment to unfold? The stage had beckoned him toward transformation, but would he rise to meet the unfolding journey ahead? In the days following his performance, Frank felt the electric tingling of possibilities sparking through every mundane task. A subtle confidence replaced the simmering doubt that had long overshadowed his creative pursuits. He no longer viewed his writing as a solitary endeavor. The shared laughter and nods of understanding dissolved his perception of being just a storyteller. This newfound sensation of collective experience ignited a fire in his spirit, compelling him to explore deeper narratives. The morning light spilled into his kitchen, illuminating a blank page in front of him. Frank found himself grasping a pen, yet instead of feeling stifled by uncertainty, he felt liberated. His story had transformed into a dialogue rather than a monologue, encouraging him to articulate the untold tales that lingered at the edges of his mind. Each stroke of the pen stirred memories, extracting narratives layered in time. Yet underlying it all was one dominant question: how could he make these stories resonate, just as his past performance had? Suddenly, the silence rippled through with an unshakable truth: his writing must reflect that authenticity. He began by channeling the vulnerable essence of his performance onto the page. The fear of judgment, once a paralyzing force, morphed into a launchpad for vivid expression. His personal anecdotes intertwined with his creative imagination, generating a narrative infused with both heart and grit. The act of writing became a labor of love and unearthed long-buried emotions. But complacency still hovered at the periphery, whispering old fears. Frank noticed a pattern. Every time he gained momentum, a sting of doubt clawed its way back. Would his words find meaning beyond this moment? Doubts morphed into tangible questions. What if no one connected with his writing? What if their laughter shifted from affection to ridicule? He recognized the recurring theme: a deep-seated reluctance to confront the haunting specter of rejection. Embracing lunch at his favorite cafe, those insecurities remained a familiar weight on his mind, prompting him to observe others around him. Conversations buzzed at nearby tables, laughter puncturing the air. He recalled how Mia's laughter had previously reverberated like a nurturing balm to his soul. With a newfound clarity, he began to understand the importance of connection in all forms, whether through stories, laughter, or shared fears was what made any narrative resonate. Frank leaned into his observations. Every figure around him embodied stories untold, and each smile hid layers of experience just waiting to be expressed. It drove him to craft not just his thoughts, but to explore the tales of others as well, considering how he could infuse their essence into his writing. The shift in perspective both intrigued and terrified him. There was sublime power in showcasing the universality of human emotion. It could transform vulnerabilities into art. The realization ignited a plan. He would seek out other stories and invite them into his narrative world, evoking laughter, tears, and pride through the lens of authenticity. It was time to confront not just his own fears, but also the fear of reaching out, exposing the hidden truths of those around him. As he returned home, each step felt like dance steps toward discovery. The weight of solitude shifted into the collective potential of shared stories. Frank envisioned his next project, a compilation of voices blending into a cohesive melody, sharing the highs and lows of being human. Yet unease loomed, foreshadowing hurdles ahead. Would others be willing to bare their souls? This venture would not only challenge him to unearth his own insecurities, but also risk facing the rejection of others unwilling to share. Facing these unknowns, Frank felt the compelling urge to push forward once again. The threshold had been crossed as he brushed against something larger than himself. A symphony of human experience awaited. Would he muster the courage to reach out, or would the fear of vulnerability silence him once more? The stakes evolved, digging deeper than mere storytelling. An expedition into the very essence of what it means to connect beckoned him onward. Frank rested before the dawn of this new chapter, enveloped in a profound question that loomed insistently. What remarkable revelations awaited him in his pursuit of stories shared among souls? The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on Frank's cluttered desk. He sat, poised to write, but a nagging hesitation gnawed at him. Although his recent realizations about the importance of shared narratives ignited a spark of creativity, he knew that the real challenge lay ahead, navigating the delicate terrain of other people's stories. How would he even begin this journey into vulnerability? Deciding to take an active step, he picked up his phone, heart pounding in anticipation. The blank screen felt like a portal into unknown territory. He scarcely knew where to start, but he had to try. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, contemplating messages to friends, family, acquaintances, anyone whose laughter, trials, or triumphs could resonate in the tapestry of his upcoming project. Hesitation turned into resolve as he began typing, a call to connect, to share, to invite. As he hit send, unease washed over him. What if they rejected him, dismissed his endeavor as folly? What if they opened up only to feel undervalued or misunderstood in his portrayal? Those fears burrowed deeply, questioning the very essence of his confidence. He couldn't allow that to hold him back, not when the universe of stories lay tantalizingly close. Days passed with a mix of nervous anticipation and fleeting excitement. The messages elicited a few responses, some warm and enthusiastic, while others were tepid, hesitant, mostly promises to consider sharing. Frank found it enlightening yet nerve-wracking. The responses mirrored his own internal conflict. He had sent out invitations for connection, looking for authenticity, yet sensed the lingering residue of doubt in each reply. He spent evenings at his desk, attempting to craft outlines and approaches. The desire to bring others' narratives into his art was strong, yet he felt the weight of his responsibility. How could he respect their individual essences while weaving them into his own voice? This struggle with authenticity mirrored his past, each word a reminder of the vulnerability he'd begun to embrace. Seeking clarity, he scheduled lunch meetings with those who had agreed to share their stories. Each encounter felt like stepping into unknown waters, both thrilling and alarming. Initially, he positioned himself as the listener, carefully asking questions that sought to unearth emotions deeply buried. The stories flowed, the laughter wrapped around them like a comforting embrace, and Frank found himself captivated. But as these tales unfolded, so too did his internal battle. The tales of hardship sliced through him, resonating with his own unvoiced struggles and amplifying the discomfort of his past fears. For each story shared, a part of him wrestled with revealing his own vulnerabilities. How could he ask someone to expose their truth when he held back his own? Amidst one deep conversation, an unexpected moment caught him off guard. Frank shared a lighthearted anecdote, one that showcased both his humility and resilience, precipitating laughter from his lunch companion. Suddenly, he was no longer just a seeker of stories. He was an active participant, allowing his own narrative threads to intertwine. That laughter echoed in his heart, a validation that brought a newfound strength to his voice. Yet, the uncertainty loomed larger. The conversations had ignited a fire, but they also forced him to confront the daunting reality ahead. Each new story solicited a germ of doubt. What if he misrepresented their truths? Would they recoil at his interpretations? The stakes appeared maddeningly high. As he walked home from the cafe one afternoon, each step felt heavier. The anticipation of what lay ahead was compounded by the fear of inadequacy. Yet that lunch echoed in his mind, igniting courage. He would strive not only to share their voices, but to forge deeper connections with his audience through these tales. Frank's heart raced as he envisioned standing before a blank page again, ready to write a first sentence that captured the essence of the multitude of experiences he had started to gather. Could he create a landscape where laughter, fear, joy, and sorrow coalesced into a tapestry? He paused, the weight of those thoughts swirling around him. The threshold loomed ahead, one that beckoned him to doggedly embrace both the light and shadow of human experience. But what if he faltered at this precipice? What unexpected truths lay hidden that he wasn't yet ready to unearth? The time had come to face the depth of these narratives and the formidable risk posed by his increasingly complex intertwining journey. Would he call upon the courage to share his own story amidst the safety of others, or would doubt silence him before he could even begin? Frank awoke the next day with a sense of urgency buzzing in his mind. Bursts of dialogue and snippets of laughter danced through his thoughts, punctuated by the weight of the stories he'd been entrusted with. His notebook, littered with notes and outlines, awaited clarity, yet he felt a block, a wall of self-doubt that loomed higher now than ever. Standing in the kitchen, he poured himself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the scent of hope and anxiety. Today was the day he resolved to convert this swirling chaos inside him into something tangible. He would write, not just for himself, but for those who had shared their truths with him. Staring out the window, he caught sight of children playing in the yard across the street. Their infectious laughter brought a pang to his heart, starkly contrasting with the heaviness he carried. In that moment, he realized something crucial. Humor, a simple, unadulterated burst of joy, could serve as an anchor in his narrative. Perhaps vulnerability was not merely about exposing pain, but also allowing space for levity, a delicate intermingling of sorrow and joy. With a newfound determination, he returned to his desk and opened his notebook. Each line felt electric as he wrote. He imagined the stories forming a mosaic, transcending his personal journey, inviting the audience to resonate with their own experiences. He began crafting a theme, finding laughter amid the falls. He envisioned anecdotes interwoven with profound realizations, how a moment of humility could shift perceptions, how laughter could stand victorious against darkness. The first draft flowed, sentences coming alive with the energy of his revelations. But as his words filled the pages, he felt an insidious whisper creeping in, a fear of being misunderstood. What if his attempts to blend humor with the more painful narratives didn't land? Would he trivialize their experiences? Panic gripped him as he stared at the words spilling across the page, feeling like an imposter. Exhaling sharply, Frank pushed back against the panic. Each character he wrote about deserved authenticity, and more than that, they deserved his honesty. With this resolve, he began to write not just their stories, but his own connections to them, his own memories of laughter evoked by struggles echoed in their tales. Later that afternoon, he'd arranged to visit his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Lindy, who had expressed a willingness to share her own narrative. She had faced numerous hardships and yet retained an incredible sense of humor that inspired him. Arriving at her apartment, He was greeted by a warm smile that nearly eclipsed the myriad difficulties etched into her being. As they spoke, Mrs. Lindy recounted her favorite stories, mixing joy with hardship, a recollection of struggles, followed by the resilience that surfaced through laughter. Frank felt inspired, capturing the essence of her wit, the way her eyes sparkled as she spoke of rainy days turned spontaneous dance-offs. It clicked. Laughter as a coping mechanism made every story valid, every pain relatable. Leaving her apartment, he felt charged. His notebook didn't feel like mere pages anymore, but a canvas alive with vibrant emotions. While awaiting her final line of the day, a sudden insight flashed. What would it mean to weave his cautionary tale into the fabric of others? Doubt still lingered, but it began to shape itself into curiosity. Could he transform his fear into an element that enhances the storytelling? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank made his way home, conscious of a change within him. He wasn't just a collector of stories. He was a thread in the tapestry that unfolded with every shared laugh and every heartfelt moment. Racing into his apartment, he committed himself to pen down his own fall, the humorous missteps that colored his existence. The laughter shared with Mrs. Lindy sparked an idea that began to take root. The release of breath caught in his chest seemed to whisper a challenge. Could he confront the very essence of his fears and emerge transformed? But as he laid the pages beside his others, contemplating their intertwined fates, he sensed an approaching storm. Would the courage he found hold when faced with the request to disclose his own vulnerabilities? The answer danced just out of reach, leaving him with a pulse of uncertainty. Still, the journey was underway. What beginnings awaited in delving into his story? And what revelations awaited that could threaten his newfound path? Frank settled back at his desk, resting with uncertainty. The soft patter of rain against the window provided a rhythmic backdrop to his swirling thoughts. With the weight of his own stories pounding at the doors of his consciousness, he felt the fragile barrier of honesty and fear begin to bend. Each raindrop was a reminder of the cascading moments he both feared and craved to disclose. It was time to confront the clashing tides of vulnerability and humor, to allow his own narrative to emerge. He took a deep breath, anticipating the intangible shift that lay ahead. He had spent countless hours weaving the experiences of others into his work. Now it was time to face his own demons. A pencil in hand, he scribbled down the first line. I fell down the stairs on the worst day possible. It felt oddly liberating. Just that admission conjured a vivid scene of embarrassment mixed with a splatter of laughter from his granddaughter, who had watched the entire event unfold. He could still hear her giggles echoing like a soundtrack to a comedic film, one that featured him stumbling and flailing in desperate attempts to regain composure. The humor in the incident had eased his own sting of embarrassment. It gave Frank insight. Life was full of unexpected tumbles, both literal and metaphorical. Reinforcing this perspective could allow him to connect with his audience on a deeper level. But the fear of revealing too much loomed large. What if his candid exploration of personal falls was perceived as trivial? What if he felt vulnerable and exposed, rather than empowered? His fingers danced across the notebook as a flood of recollections began to flow, each memory sculpted into words, key moments that shaped his identity. The laughter, the tears, each had a role to play in the tapestry he wished to craft. He found himself reflecting on other significant moments in his life, the anxiety at job interviews, traumatic relationships, and that time he misinterpreted a cue during a public speaking class and accidentally told a terrible joke. Each misstep had an accompanying lesson wrapped in vulnerability, and he could almost sense the laughter begin to bubble up alongside the pain, creating a symphony of resilience. Knowing that every experience shared was steeped in his own authenticity deepened his resolve. But as adrenaline sparked creativity, he felt a sobering realization creep in: would readers resonate with his fall? Or would they find his honesty off-putting? The internal combat between authenticity and acceptance left him momentarily paralyzed. Yet, as the rain intensified, a thought struck him like thunder. Genuine storytelling does not pander for approval, it transcends it. He envisioned the moments he had laughed with others, the shared experiences that had illuminated the darkness, and his chest swelled with determination. What if he framed his explorations not as confessions, but as shared wisdom? Embracing embarrassment as a catalyst for growth could forge connections, weaving threads that unified scattered experiences into a shared, collective tapestry. The clock ticked relentlessly, but Frank pushed into the night, his thoughts igniting further ideas. The vulnerability he feared would only surface as he shared his intricate falls. They were not weaknesses, but launching pads into shared humanity. It was the raw, unfiltered blend of clumsiness and humor that painted honesty into his narratives. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, jarring him from his thoughts. A notification from a local writing group where he had hesitated to share his ideas caught his eye. They urged for personal storytelling. What if he took a courageous leap and shared tonight? But would it be enough? Would opening up about himself grant him the freedom he sought, or plunge him deeper into uncertainty? He gripped his pencil tightly. Perhaps this was the moment of truth that awaited him. Embrace the vulnerability or hide away in the comfort of anonymity. The shadows of doubt hung heavily, whispering ominously in his ear, yet the potential for transformation loomed larger. Would he summon the courage to step into the light, and how would it affect the narrative he sought to craft? The storm of uncertainty swirled within him, leaving him teetering on the brink of a decision that could shape his journey profoundly. Frank's decision to share his story weighed heavily on him, balanced precariously between fear and anticipation. As he mulled over the notification on his phone, his heart raced. Would the writing group's enthusiasm welcome him, or would they judge him harshly for his vulnerabilities? He had never considered himself a particularly brave person. Self-doubt had often crowded his thoughts, making it difficult to pursue ideas that felt too personal. But tonight felt different. He glanced at the clock, its hands mocking his indecision as they inched closer to the start time of the group meeting. Each tick resonated with a pulse of urgency, a reminder that moments of transformation are seldom convenient. The truth was, he could either retreat into the safety of anonymity or unravel himself for the world to see. The walls of his home, usually a comforting fortress, felt like a prison now, stifling his spontaneity. The rain remained a steady companion, every drop tapping softly against the glass, echoing the rhythm of his pounding heart. He took a moment to breathe deeply, allowing the air to fill his lungs, filling him with a rare sense of clarity. Driven by an emerging sense of purpose, he made a decision. He would share a story tonight, his story. Transferring his thoughts from his mind to paper felt like shedding weight. He wrote rapidly, heart racing, as he captured the essence of the moment that had sparked this entire journey. The day he fell down the stairs. What had initially seemed like a moment of sheer horror transformed into a delightful memory of laughter and connection. Frank didn't just want to recount the incident. He wanted to convey the joy it had ultimately brought him. Fleeting doubts flickered across his thoughts. Would listeners grasp the potent mix of humor and embarrassment he hoped to encapsulate? The contours of his narrative took form, intertwining clumsiness with life lessons. He realized that vulnerability in storytelling didn't just elicit pity or concern, but opened portals to shared experiences, a bridge to relatability. As he scribbled down the details, he couldn't help but notice a gradual shift occurring within him. Each phrase pulled his insecurities from the shadows, revealing deep-seated humorous reflections he had survived. It was in this realization that Frank discovered his hidden competency, his ability to view life's tumbles not as shameful residues, but as fodder for connection and laughter. When he finally glanced at the completed draft, an unexpected exhilaration coursed through him. The profound act of sharing his narrative was as liberating as it was terrifying, nudging him closer to the core of who he wanted to be as a writer. Yet, as he prepared to leave for the meeting, the last vestiges of doubt crept in. Was this enough? Could he truly engage an audience with his simple experience? What if their laughter turned to dismissal? He paused, staring into the mirror, questioning himself again. But as he looked closer, he saw not just a man on the brink of sharing vulnerabilities. He saw a storyteller ready to embrace the fullness of his identity. Tonight could either be his rebirth or another fall, but such was the risk of authenticity. Frank stepped into the light. His determination propelled him outside and into the cool night air, each step carrying the weight of his truth. The sound of laughter from the gathering space drifted towards him, inviting yet intimidating. He hesitated momentarily, a new conflict emerging. This was the moment to confront his fears head-on, a crossroad where he could either rise or retreat. With one last deep breath, he pushed open the door. Would they welcome his story, or would he face rejection that left him paralyzed? Every potential path before him shimmered with possibility. The real journey, his evolution as both a storyteller and a person, was only just beginning. As Frank entered the small gathering, a familiar warmth enveloped him. The room was filled with faces, each eager to share their own stories, yet he felt himself positioned across an invisible chasm of vulnerability. Those faces, once intimidating, now reflected a spectrum of understanding and shared experiences. They were not judges, they were mirrors of his own struggles. "Tonight, I want to share something personal," he began, his voice steady against the backdrop of hushed excitement. The room quieted, every eye on him expecting brilliance veiled in sincerity. "It starts with a fall." The collective breath held in suspense signaled the beginning of a new chapter. As he recounted the tale of his tumble, he intertwined humor with humility, revealing to them not just the act of falling, but the subsequent layer of laughter shared with his granddaughter, Mia. Each laugh echoed across the room, mingling with moments of reflection. He painted vivid pictures of not just the event, but of a life spent stumbling toward greatness in small, human ways. Frank felt the weight of self-doubt dissolve with each laugh he received, transforming into a tapestry rich with connection. In sharing that single event, he uncovered layers of resilience and hope. The laughter prompted memories of mishaps, regrets, and the sweet moments that had threaded their way through his life. As he spoke, he saw nods of recognition. Others were leaning in, hungry for that shared connection, those slips and falls that made them human. The fears he once shouldered trembled and crumbled, revealing a glimmer of worthiness behind them. When he finished, applause erupted, a chorus of approval mingled with appreciation validation. Frank stood there, heart pounding, a swell of gratitude washing over him. They weren't just clapping for a story, they were resonating with an experience. Each clap symbolized the risk he had taken, the walls he had cracked, the journey he had embarked upon. In that moment, he realized he had achieved something profound. He had successfully combined the fragments of his past into a coherent narrative. Frank's storytelling had evolved from him being a mere chronicler to being an artist, able to entwine personal anecdotes with universal truths. He felt empowered, recognized not just as Frank, the former educator, but as Frank, the storyteller. As conversations buzzed around him post-presentation, he felt an authentic connection blossoming. Writers were now approaching him, eager to share their own falls, each story interlacing with his, constructing a supportive community built on vulnerability and strength. At that moment, he grasped the essence of creative expression. It was never about perfection, it was about the journey through fallibility, the laughter that flourishes amid struggles. Leaving the gathering, Frank felt transformed. He had not only confronted his apprehensions, but had dismantled them piece by piece. The old notebooks no longer represented memories of forgotten dreams. They were a treasure trove waiting to be filled with his evolving voice. Confidence flickered in his mind, a robust realization that he had conquered the insecurities that had plagued him for years. His final act of self-acknowledgement emerged with clarity. Frank would not simply write stories, he would write to connect, to resonate, to inspire. He envisioned future projects embracing both his narrative and the narratives of those who dared to share, weaving tales of joy, vulnerability, and laughter into a fabric that illustrated life's complexities. This was his metamorphosis, the leap from trepidation to triumph, the realization of his competencies bubbling to the surface. Frank stood proud in his established position, the authentic storyteller, ready to face whatever challenges laid ahead, armed with the belief that falling could create pathways to connection and understanding, and in that exhilarating embrace of destiny, he whispered a final, resolute vow to himself: "I will share my laughter as fiercely as I share my falls." Now, let this be your moment to Embrace transformation alongside Frank's journey. You need to subscribe now to not miss out on the next exclusive emotional stories that propel personal growth. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support for stories that matter. Comment your reactions and theories about Frank's inspiring closure. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Join this community of growth and laughter. Your story matters.